Hey there folks, Rel here. Today we'll be taking a look at the 3 different chassis options for my favorite vehicle in the whole game, that's the Flash. A fair warning though, this review is going to be mostly subjective as I don't really have a lot of hard numbers to offer you as far as increases go, but frankly those matter a lot less than how each chassis is actually going to change the way the Flash performs and feels for you. There are 3 performance chassis available for the Flash at the moment, the Racer, the Surger, and the Scrapper chassis, and the descriptions are very vague as to what they actually offer, and they don't really speak to the true benefits or detriments offered by each. The first and easiest to describe is the Racer chassis. An unupgraded Flash tops out at around 75 kph, and the rank 3 Racer chassis actually bumps it up to 85 kph. So that's just a flat 10 on top of your max, and that may not sound like a whole lot of speed increase, but the most beneficial part of this frame is not so much the top speed as it is the acceleration that it gives you. So whenever you're in a bind, you'll be able to take off much more quickly than the standard Flash, and here's a side-by-side window to show you the difference. You probably won't feel the differences between the normal Flash and the rank 1 Racer frame, but don't judge it solely on that. It becomes much more distinct at ranks 2 and 3. The Racer chassis is also going to help you make it up short, steep slopes much more easily than the other frames will, and it's even on par with the other 2 chassis for actual hill climbing. This may sound a bit strange at first as climbing falls into the realm of the Surger chassis, supposedly, but the quick acceleration and overall torque increases is going to translate into the ability to climb, and that's until traction starts to give way. To demonstrate my point, here's how the 3 different chassis perform in a straight up hill climb. And you'll see that they're very, very similar. The Racer chassis, it seems to slide a little bit more, so I am trying to adjust and kind of change the direction to follow that same path that I did with the Scrapper and the Surger frames. But really, this is all pretty much the same. I'll talk a little bit more on it later when we cover the Scrapper and the Surger chassis. But the big downside that I should probably talk about with the Racer chassis is that the Flash becomes more difficult to control overall, especially on sloped terrain. You're going to see yourself spinning out a lot more than you normally would. The counter to this is to use shorter turn movements instead of large sweeping ones, and instead of hammering the brake you kind of have to tap it and make smaller adjustments. But once you get used to the Racer chassis, the downsides actually turn into advantages. So an example is that you can recover from spinouts much more quickly than you can with other chassis as soon as you get the timing down. But on flat ground is where the Racer chassis works best, and it's a great tool for getting around quickly, but it doesn't handle that well on rougher terrain. What's interesting is that it makes little to no difference in the speed boost of your turbo. I did a couple of tests with this, and the turbo actually tops you out at 100 kilometers per hour, period. I mean, it's not going to go above that if you have the Racer chassis, and it's not going to go below that if you have just a stock frame. Overall, the Racer chassis is great for getting from place to place, and to a very small degree, it can actually make up for not having turbos. But if you're going to equip this frame with a gun, you may have an advantage while stationary at greater ranges, as you can quickly accelerate away from the scene when people start to catch on. But for closer fights, where being nimble is important, the maneuverability definitely isn't there. And that's where the Scrapper comes in. The Scrapper is the king of control. You'll be able to swing tighter circles, recover from controlled slides, and all sorts of fun maneuvers much more easily than the other chassis, and the braking speed gets a noticeable upgrade as well. So as you can probably tell, the Scrapper chassis gives you a lot more control over the Flash. And this is ideal for coping with the limited turret swivel that the Flash is just cursed with. and it will make your fighting a lot easier all around. The Scrapper is also amazing at maneuvering tight spaces like towers, and you'll probably notice the rank 1 improvement over the standard Flash more than you would any of the other frames. The Scrapper is a really solid chassis choice with no real downsides and huge benefits in the realm of control and maneuverability. It's probably the best chassis in the game if I were to go ahead and label them, I guess, simply because of how much it benefits and changes the way the Flash operates. The Surger chassis is probably the most simple and at the same time most frustrating chassis. Not because it's bad, it's actually very good. It just doesn't have any specific purpose. Before Game Update 2 came out, the #1 cause of death while using a Flash was rollover. And at this time, the Surger chassis was great because it allowed your shocks to compress more instead of being so rigid, and this meant that you would survive landing on your side or keep from rolling over a lot easier. And while this is still kind of the case, just given the changes that they've made with traction, the Surger chassis' niche has been diminished a lot because the rolling over issue it's just a little bit more difficult to do now. So actually, in one of the patch updates, rolling over wasn't even an issue. It was completely survivable, and honestly, I think it was a step in the right direction, if a bit wonky. According to the description, the Surger chassis would like to provide you with better handling and hill climbing, and this isn't the case. Not really. The Surger chassis gives you a softer suspension, but that's it. And when I'm going over small bumps, you're not going to feel them as much because the wheels will compress into the chassis without really knocking you about. And there's also a really minor, just hidden sort of benefit, and that's that it makes your suspension less squeaky, as it won't create a sound effect unless you impact something pretty hard. A slightly more noticeable benefit is that your Flash's weapon becomes a little bit more stable while moving, and it's not incredibly noticeable, and it's definitely not worth ignoring the Scrapper chassis for if your intent is to create a Battle Flash. And speaking of the Battle Flash, Kevin Moyer, the vehicle designer for PlanetSide 2, said that turret stabilization is something they're working on for future versions, so fighting from the Flash should be a little bit more reliable all around at that point. Along the same lines, as long as you're using the Surger chassis, your passengers are going to have a slightly less annoying time trying to shoot at enemies because those small bumps are going to, for the most part, be ignored by that soft suspension. Another issue with the Surger chassis is that landing at steeper angles, like if you come off of a jump and then smack into a cliffside or something, it's going to slow you down a lot more than the Racer or the Scrapper chassis would. And this is because your shocks will actually take some time to compress and absorb the impact, whereas the other more rigid chassis will kind of just take the hit and then pick up where they left off. The big issue though with this chassis is that as far as hill climbing goes, it just simply doesn't do what it leads you to believe. Any angle you can climb with the Surger, you're also going to be able to climb with the Racer or the Scrapper. And due to speed and acceleration being so useful for steeper climbs, the Racer is going to trump the Surger every time. Now, nitpicking and false descriptions and detriments aside, there are some redeeming qualities of the Surger chassis. The most important and positive quality of the Surger is that it makes the Flash a lot less annoying to drive. Now, usually the smallest bump can be a nuisance, but the Surger chassis will kind of float along as if they're nothing. And it comes together to create a much cleaner and easygoing ride that's difficult to explain. In my eyes though, it is hands down the best chassis for newer or less experienced players. So if you're having trouble getting the Flash to go where you want it to, you use the Surger. If you roll over far more often than you'd like, you use the Surger. Another redeeming quality of the Surger chassis is that it will allow you to line up your turbo boost to make accurate jumps more easily. And that's because your Flash isn't going to be as finicky with the smaller bumps that can easily point you in the wrong direction. It's very easy to get exactly where you want to go with that turbo. What frustrates me with the Surger is that it doesn't really have a unique role aside from just making the ride smoother. I mean, the Racer is better for travel, Scrapper is better for combat, and the Surger is just the Surger. If I were to suggest a way to give the Surger chassis a unique role, it would just be to make it stick to and power up hills like you expect it would. And honestly, I think that the basic, unupgraded Flash should handle a bit more like the Surger chassis, just right out of the box, because it has a lot of great features that would help out newer players who get frustrated by using them. But to have to upgrade the chassis to get that same result just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So again, make the Surger climb hills and climb them really, really well, and that's the niche I think the chassis should have and could fill. To overview, these are my thoughts on the chassis. The Racer is a really solid chassis all around if you can compensate for the little more unwieldiness in your turns, and it's especially useful for those equipped with a Wraith Cloak, as it will make you more difficult to pin down and let you scout and position yourself more quickly. If you primarily use the Flash as a mode of transportation, get the Racer. The Scrapper is great for fighting both in open fields and maneuvering tight quarters, and there's really no downsides to using the Scrapper chassis. It's a solid upgrade and definitely gets top honors in my book. If you plan on using the Flash for combat, then the Scrapper is the way to go. The Surger chassis is great for a better feeling Flash all around, and the smooth ride kind of contributes to slightly better aim for both the driver and the passenger, and it helps prevent rollovers to a degree. If you have a hard time using the stock Flash, then the Surger will make it a much more enjoyable experience for you. That's about all I had to share. If this video has been interesting or helpful, please feel free to like, subscribe, and tell your friends about the channel. And if there's anything I left out, or if you flat out disagree with me, just leave a comment or a video response below so everyone can see. Thanks very much, folks. We're all signing off.